creature's call. Whispers from the eternal void.
They were praying backward through the warp itself. Every devotion uttered on St. Lyralay's hollow returned 9 minutes later as perfect, blasphemous inversion, each syllable a wound in the fabric of faith that bled across 17 sectors, like viral hymns of damnation. I am Interrogator Cassia Vex of the Ordo Hereticus, and in my 37 years of service aboard the strike cruiser, Righteous Inquiry, I have witnessed corruption in forms that would shatter lesser minds. But this defied classification. This was sacred sound, weaponized against itself. The Emperor's own words turned to heretical palindromes that made listeners weep blood from their eyes. The Auspex readings mocked every law of physics I had learned in the Schola Progenium. St. Lyralay's hollow registered as a crystalline shell surrounding perfect void. No planetary core, no molten heart, just emptiness wrapped in impossible geometry. Yet surface gravity remained standard, atmospheric readings showed breathable air, and electromagnetic signatures pulsed with the rhythm of a thriving shrine world. The planet existed as it should not, maintained by forces that violated the Omnissiah's sacred mathematics. I found myself reciting the litany against hubris as I reviewed the classified Mechanicus geological surveys, their data streams painting hollow spaces beneath every cathedral where pilgrims had knelt for 3 millennia. The stakes crystallized with brutal clarity through Astropath Valdris's trembling transmission. Cardinal Mortius's pilgrimage fleet, the faithful multitude, carried 200,000 souls toward their planned benediction at St. Lyralay's primary cathedral. 6 days out from the hollow, unaware their destination had become something that violated natural order. The planet's garrison, a full regiment of Cadian shock troops and attached Mechanicus contingent, had maintained Vox silence for 72 hours, save for liturgical transmissions that caused spontaneous hemorrhaging in anyone who monitored them for more than 90 seconds. My Rosarius began its low, harmonic humming the moment we achieved translation, its blessed machine spirit responding to some quality of the world below that triggered responses coded into sacred programming millennia ago. The iron halo vibrated against my throat like a distant organ pipe, sounding notes no musician had the right to find. When I angled the relic toward the planet, the frequency intensified, creating harmonics that made the ship's hull sing in sympathy. The sound carried undertones that reminded me of choir practice in my youth, before the Schola Progenium taught me that some songs were too dangerous to sing. From high orbit, St. Lyralay's hollow appeared as it always had in the Pict captures, verdant continents wrapped in devotional cloud formations, cathedral spires piercing the atmosphere like golden needles of faith. But long-range auger feeds revealed the first sign of wrongness that made my skin crawl with recognition. The shadows cast by those magnificent spires moved independently of their structures, sliding across the planet's surface in patterns that suggested intelligence, purpose, malevolent geometry that had nothing to do with the movement of suns or moons. The bridge grew cold enough that even the servitor's breath steamed, each exhalation hanging a fraction too long in air that tasted of ozone and sanctified incense turned rancid. We ran silent, guns safe, prayers whispered. The Righteous Inquiry's cogitators drew literal heat from the phenomena, their housings bleeding warmth that forced the engine seers to lay hands and recite Binharic consolations, while sacred coolant wept from overloaded systems, like tears of the machine god. I pressed my palm against the data slate containing the suppressed Mechanicus surveys, feeling the weight of knowledge that the Adeptus Mechanicus had petitioned to classify, then capitulated when the ecclesiarchy sanctified the place as a locus of miraculous healings. Between the redacted strata, I found references to non-agonal lattices in the planetary crust, crystalline formations that grew in perfect nine-sided patterns whose molecular structure defied analysis. The planet's shell registered as no more than 50 kilometers thick, yet somehow supported continents, oceans, and the accumulated faith of billions across the centuries. Environmental readings continued to confound rational analysis. Surface temperatures remained within acceptable parameters, yet thermal imaging showed cold spots that moved across the planet in deliberate patterns. Atmospheric composition held steady at imperial standard, but spectrographic analysis revealed trace elements that existed only in theoretical treatises, isotopes of matter that existed in quantum superposition between states. The planet breathed with impossible lungs, sustained by physics that belonged in forbidden texts rather than observable reality. The reverse litanies intensified as we descended toward high orbit, their blasphemous cadence creating interference patterns that made reality itself seem to waver around the edges. Navigator Prime Kyle reported warp shadows moving against the current of the Empyrean, as if the Immaterium itself flowed backward around St. Lirelai's hollow. Even the servitors began exhibiting anomalous behavior, their binary cant occasionally reversing mid-transmission, creating prayers that praised entropy over order. Techmarine Valeth's voice crackled over the Vox network, his augmetic larynx struggling to process the data flowing through his neural interfaces. Interrogator, chronometer systems are experiencing temporal distortions. The planet's gravitational field appears to be affecting the flow of time itself. Recommend immediate. His transmission cut to static, as every timepiece aboard the Righteous Inquiry simultaneously flickered and died. The massive bridge chronometer, the smallest personal timekeeper, even the atomic clocks buried deep in the ship's core, all displayed the same impossible reading. 000.M41000. A timestamp that existed outside imperial dating, before the birth of the Imperium itself, or perhaps after its death. The numbers pulsed in perfect synchronization with my Rosarius's humming, creating temporal harmony that made the air itself ring like a struck bell. In that held breath between heartbeats, reality felt thin as parchment, ready to tear at the slightest pressure. The bridge lights dimmed to cathedral dusk, and somewhere in the ship's depths I heard the sound of a vast choir singing hymns that had not yet been written. Then my vox bead crackled to life against my skin, filled with a transmission that stopped both my hearts, my own voice, speaking in perfect reverse Gothic, the words flowing backward, yet somehow comprehensible, syllables I could feel forming in my teeth as I heard them. Welcome home, Interrogator Vex. We have been waiting for you to arrive. We have been waiting for you to come home. The transmission ended, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and the harmonic hum of my Rosarius, now perfectly synchronized with whatever force dwelt in the hollow heart of the saint's world below. The Thunderhawk shuddered through St. Lirelai's crystalline atmosphere, like a prayer spoken through clenched teeth, its hull singing with harmonics that violated the fundamental laws of light propagation. I gripped the restraint harness as we descended through air that had become a living prism, refracting electromagnetic radiation into impossible spectrums that painted our gunship in colors that hurt to perceive. The atmosphere itself served as a lens, bending reality through molecular structures that existed in quantum superposition between gas and crystalline solid. Tempestus Scion Mordak checked his Hellgun's charge pack with mechanical precision, his scarred features tense beneath his carapace helm. Interrogator, atmospheric composition fluctuating in 9-second intervals, oxygen levels cycling between 14 and 23%. Recommend sealed systems immediately. I engaged my rebreather as the humidity began to taste of blessed oils, turned rancid, sacred chrism corrupted by forces that transformed devotion into decay. Each breath coated my throat with residue that made speaking the Emperor's name feel like blasphemy. The air carried undertones of myrrh and frankincense, but wrong somehow, as if the molecules themselves had been inverted at the atomic level, their sacred properties twisted into mockery. Gravity betrayed us with metronomic precision. Every 9 seconds, the Thunderhawk's internal system struggled to compensate for fluctuations that defied rational physics. Equipment floated momentarily, bolt rounds drifting from magazines, sacred texts lifting from their cases, even droplets of blessed water rising from their fonts, before slamming back down with force that dented ceramite armor plates. My Rosarius hummed against my throat, its machine spirit agitated by the pervasive wrongness that made reality itself ring like a struck bell. Landing zone acquired. The pilot's voice crackled over the vox, strained with effort. Sanctum Primaris Cathedral Plaza. Visual confirmation of Emperor's blood. What am I seeing down there? Through the armored viewport, our destination resolved from atmospheric distortion into impossible clarity. The landing zone showed signs of recent habitation that mocked rational explanation. Devotional candles burned in perfect formation across the plaza's marble expanse, their flames steady and bright despite complete absence of wind. Prayer wheels spun backward along the cathedral's exterior walls, their bronze surfaces gleaming with condensation that flowed upward rather than down. Incense smoke fell like ash from braziers that should have been cold, accumulating in grey drifts that formed patterns too geometric to be natural. The Thunderhawk touched down with grinding of landing gear against stone that rang like a funeral bell. As the assault ramp lowered, silence greeted us, not absence of sound, but presence of quiet, so complete it possessed weight and substance. Even our footsteps on the marble plaza were muffled, as if the air itself absorbed vibration before it could propagate properly. Techmarine Valeth's Auspex began chattering immediately, its machine spirit confused by readings that contradicted visual evidence. Massive biosignatures throughout the cathedral complex. Interrogator. Thousands of human life signs detected, but visual confirmation shows corresponding empty space. The Auspex insists there are crowds where we see nothing. We approached the first survivors, 3 penitent pilgrims kneeling in perfect formation before a shrine to Saint Lirelai, their rough-spun robes arranged with ceremonial precision. Their mouths moved in silent prayer, lips forming words with mechanical regularity that spoke of devotion transcending mortal limitations. But as I drew closer, the stench of decay made my enhanced olfactory systems recoil. These pilgrims had been dead for days, their flesh grey and waxy, yet their mouths continued moving in perfect synchronization. Forming the litany of faith, in reverse, I knelt beside the nearest corpse, a woman whose prayer beads had fused to her skeletal fingers through some process that crystallized bone and blessed amber into single substance. Her lips moved with rhythm of prayer I knew by heart, but the words emerged backward, each syllable a perfect inversion of sacred text that made my rosarius hum with distress. The litany she spoke praised doubt over faith, entropy over order, the void over the Emperor's light. "Movement in the cathedral," Scion Mordak reported, his voice tight with controlled tension. "Thermal imaging shows heat signatures that exist without bodies, cold spots that move with deliberate purpose." The Cathedral of Sanctum Primaris rose before us like a mountain of carved faith, its spires piercing the crystalline atmosphere until they disappeared into prismatic distortion. Gothic buttresses supported walls that seemed to extend infinitely upward, while stained glass windows depicted scenes from St. Lyralei's martyrdom in colors that shifted depending on viewing angle. The massive brass doors, each tall enough to admit a titan, stood closed, yet somehow welcoming. As we approached the main entrance, our shadows fell wrong on the marble, extending in directions that had nothing to do with the local star's position. The shadows moved independently, reaching toward the cathedral doors, as if drawn by magnetic force. My own shadow knelt in prayer, while I remained standing, creating visual discord that made my eyes water with effort of processing contradictory information. Temperature dropped with each step forward, cold that had nothing to do with weather, and everything to do with absence of something fundamental to human existence. The blessed oils in my equipment began to congeal, while sacred texts in my pack grew heavy as lead ingots, their parchment pages crackling with frost that formed in nonagonal patterns. Without warning, the massive brass doors began swinging open, their hinges singing with harmonics that made the air itself vibrate in sympathy. The sound was beautiful and terrible, like a choir of angels singing hymns of damnation. No servitors operated the mechanisms, no human hands guided their movement, yet they opened with ceremonial precision that spoke of intelligence and purpose. But instead of the expected nave with soaring arches and devotional alcoves, the doors revealed something that made my enhanced mind struggle to process what my eyes reported. Beyond the threshold lay not the cathedral's interior, but a perfect mirror image of the plaza where we stood. Marble stones, devotional candles, even the shrine where 3 dead pilgrims knelt in eternal prayer, all reflected with flawless accuracy. And there, in the mirrored sky above the mirrored plaza, our own Thunderhawk descended through crystalline atmosphere, its hull singing with prismatic light as it approached a landing zone that existed on both sides of reality simultaneously. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping through the surface tension of reality itself. The cathedral's main nave stretched both upward and downward simultaneously, its vaulted ceiling extending into crystalline infinity, while marble floors descended into impossible depths that made my enhanced vision struggle to find focus. Pews carved from blessed blackwood lined not just the traditional floor, but climbed the walls in perfect formation and hung suspended from the ceiling as if gravity operated according to devotional need rather than physical law. The air inside tasted of incense and temporal displacement, each breath carrying molecules that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. My Rosarius hummed with increasing agitation, its blessed machine spirit responding to forces that violated the fundamental constants of reality. Dust motes caught in shafts of prismatic light drifted in multiple vectors, some falling, some rising, some moving horizontally in defiance of natural order. Tempestus Scion Mordak raised his hell gun, scanning the impossible architecture with disciplined precision. Interrogator, gravity readings are inconsistent throughout the structure. My Auspex indicates we could walk on any surface as if it were floor level. To test his hypothesis, I stepped toward the nearest wall where pews waited in perfect formation. My foot found purchase on vertical marble as if it were horizontal stone, gravity reorienting itself to accommodate faith rather than physics. The altar dominated the cathedral's nexus, where all wrong gravities agreed to meet, carved from single piece of crystalline material that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns in 9-second intervals. But where reliquaries should have contained blessed bones and sacred artifacts, I found perfectly spherical voids that hurt to perceive directly. Each void emanated warmth like human body temperature, accompanied by sounds of distant weeping that seemed to emerge from spaces between atoms, rather than any physical source. Tekmarine Valeth approached with augmetic sensors extended, his mechadendrites probing the impossible geometry. These voids register as negative space, Interrogator. Not absence of matter, but presence of antimatter contained in stasis fields that predate Imperial technology. The weeping sounds are harmonic resonances created by quantum fluctuations in the containment matrix. Every surface carried non-agonal patterns that resolved into tyranny once seen. 9-point starbursts in the filigree, 9-edged flowers hidden in fresco petals, 9-faceted bosses along the vault ribs, their facets misaligned by fractional degrees that made my teeth ache. The deeper we pressed into the sanctum, the more ornate the nonagons became, until they spiraled over one another in palimpsests of intention. In the cathedral's archives, hidden behind walls that phase-shifted between solid stone and crystalline transparency, we discovered administratum records that painted patterns of systematic horror across centuries, documents inscribed on parchment that aged and renewed itself in 9-second cycles, detailed devotional tithes collected during major feast days, precise numbers of pilgrims who vanished during moments of peak religious fervor, always in multiples of 9, always during prayers of specific duration, always from locations where faith reached critical mass. My Auspex registered massive biosignatures beneath the cathedral floor, readings suggesting thousands of human life forms existing in spaces that scans revealed as empty crystalline caverns. The contradiction created cognitive dissonance that made my enhanced mind struggle to process conflicting information. Life existed where no life could be, in spaces too small to contain physical forms, yet somehow accommodating entire congregations. The true horror revealed itself in the devotional chapels, thousands of pilgrims' effects arranged in perfect prayer formations, rough-spun robes kneeling in eternal supplication, prayer beads clutched in sleeves that contained no hands, devotional texts held open by fingers that cast no shadows. The clothing maintained human postures with precision that spoke of recent habitation, yet contained no bones, no flesh, no physical evidence that bodies had ever occupied them. as if the faithful had simply evaporated while maintaining their devotional positions, leaving behind only the external trappings of mortality, while their essence was consumed by forces that required faith as fuel. Temperature dropped as we approached the altar's base, cold that seeped into marrow. Not atmospheric chill, but profound emptiness made manifest. Deep beneath the altar, half hidden by fallen tapestry, depicting St. Lyralei's miracles, we discovered a maintenance shaft sealed with mechanicus locks, bearing Binharic runes that glowed with faint power. Valeth's augmetic tools interfaced with technology that belonged to the Dark Age, his mechadendrites reciting the canticle of unsealing in Binharic counterpoint to my whispered catechism of purity. Numbers clicked past in non-agonal cadence as ancient mechanisms protested our intrusion with machine spirit distress. "By permit and ordinance of the Red Planet," Valeth grated, "I invoke sub-clause 9 of the right of necessary trespass." The final seal broke with a sigh of displaced air, revealing a throat of polished crystal descending into darkness. The rush of atmosphere that followed carried scents of ozone and sanctified oils, accompanied by pressure equalization that felt like benediction against our faces. Then came the sound, vast, echoing, magnificent. A choir singing the Te Deum, the ancient hymn of praise that had echoed through imperial cathedrals for 10 millennia. The crystal shaft carried the melody with perfect fidelity, every contour etched into stone by calculation and devotion. For half a breath I wanted to weep in relief, to kneel and surrender to voices that promised everything good. But the pattern resolved into horror. It was not many voices singing in harmony. It was one voice multiplied by time, spooled out across centuries, and drawn back through itself, each layer offset by seconds, years, lives, past and future laid atop one another until harmony became geography. Every vowel identical, every breath from the same lungs, every plea and praise from the same throat. A single singer, welcoming itself in eternal inverted prayer across the barriers of time. The voice was mine. The descent through the Mechanicus maintenance shaft transformed reality into a throat of living crystal that pulsed with bioluminescent conduits in 9-second intervals, each flash illuminating non-agonal patterns etched into walls that sang with harmonic frequencies beyond human comprehension. Temperature bled away with mathematical precision, 1 degree per 10 meters of descent, creating cold that had nothing to do with atmospheric conditions, and everything to do with proximity to forces that violated the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. My rosarius hummed against my throat with increasing agitation, its blessed machine spirit responding to emanations that made the air itself taste of ozone and sanctified oils turned rancid. I deployed my kill team in staggered formation, military doctrine adapted to impossible architecture that defied tactical assessment. Tempestus Scion Mordak took point position, his hell guns muzzled tracking potential threats in crystalline passages that extended beyond our lumen strip's penetration. His scarred features remained impassive behind his carapace helm, but tension radiated from shoulders that had carried him through 100 campaigns without encountering geometry that operated according to devotional mathematics rather than physics. 30 meters down and descending, Mordak's vox crackled with interference that resolved into whispered prayers in languages that predated Imperial Gothic. Shaft continues beyond Auspex range. Structural integrity appears solid, but the walls are conducting something that isn't electricity. Tech-Marine Valeth monitored our descent with augmetic sensors that painted the shaft's interior in false-color spectrums, his mechadendrites interfacing with crystalline conduits to extract data from systems that belonged to the dark age of technology. These conduits carry information in quantum superposition, he reported, his augmetic larynx struggling to process concepts that violated machine spirit orthodoxy. Data exists in multiple temporal states simultaneously. The crystal matrix is storing and transmitting across chronological barriers. The servo skulls I deployed ahead returned with picked feeds that made my enhanced mind recoil from processing contradictory geometry. Cherubim 9 transmitted views of corridors from angles that couldn't exist, perspectives showing the shaft from above while the skull descended, imagery capturing our own descent from positions the skull had never occupied. Seraphim 3 began exhibiting signs of temporal displacement, its machine spirit reciting the litany of stealth in perfect reverse, while optical sensors wept lubricant that crystallized into non-agonal formations. By the Omnissiah's grace, something is interfering with sacred cogitators, Valeth intoned, his voice tight with techno-theological concern. The skull's memory banks contain records of this mission from perspectives that exist outside linear causality. Seraphim 3's voxcaster began to smoke, then melt, sacred metals flowing like tears as its machine spirit surrendered to forces beyond imperial comprehension. Before final silence, it transmitted one last picked feed. Our own team, viewed from below, ascending the shaft while simultaneously descending, temporal paradox made visible through blessed optics that recorded impossibility with mechanical precision. Deeper in the shaft, wedged between crystalline conduits that pulsed with data streams older than the Immaterium, we discovered a data slate bearing Mechanicus seals. Its memory banks remained intact despite exposure to forces that should have wiped its cogitator clean. Valeth interfaced with the device through mechadendrite connections that sparked with temporal discharge, his augmetic features tightening with effort. Interrogator, these maintenance logs are dated 3 centuries in the future, but they describe events happening in the present moment, he reported, his voice strained with disbelief. According to these records, this expedition was completed successfully, with full documentation of phenomena we're experiencing now. The logs detail our current descent, including conversations we haven't had yet and discoveries we haven't made. The data slate contained technical specifications for equipment that wouldn't be invented for millennia, alongside detailed schematics of the shaft we descended through. Most disturbing were personal logs written in my own hand, describing emotions I hadn't felt yet, decisions I hadn't made, revelations that existed in future tense while manifesting in present reality. Sound began to dominate our descent as we passed the 50-meter mark. 3 hollow knocks echoed from depths below us, their rhythm precise and deliberate, resonating through crystalline walls with harmonic frequencies that penetrated enhanced bone and ceramite armor alike. Before echoes faded, 3 identical knocks answered from above, creating acoustic patterns that synchronized with our heartbeats, until distinguishing between internal and external percussion became impossible. The knocking continued in perfect cadence, 3 from below, 3 from above, creating temporal rhythm that forced our hearts to beat in time with forces beyond understanding. My Rosarius hummed in harmony with the knocking, its blessed machine spirit responding to frequencies that carried undertones of prayer and supplication. Each sequence of knocks formed part of larger pattern that resolved into familiar cadence. The opening measures of the Te Deum, played on instruments carved from crystallized time itself. Structural analysis indicates the shaft terminates in a vast chamber, approximately 50 meters below current position, Valeth reported, his sensors painting impossible architecture in false-color displays. The chamber appears to be carved from single crystalline matrix, with walls thin enough to permit visual observation of exterior spaces that shouldn't exist. As we approached the shaft's terminus, my chronometer began exhibiting behavior that violated fundamental laws of temporal measurement. The digits flickered, then began counting backward with inexorable precision. 998.m, 41.127, becoming .126, then .125, seconds flowing in reverse while I remained conscious of forward progression, creating temporal paradox that made my enhanced mind struggle to maintain coherent thought patterns. The shaft opened into vastness that stole breath from enhanced lungs. A crystalline chamber stretched beyond visual range, its transparent walls revealing impossible vistas through barriers thin as cathedral glass. Through the crystal, I glimpsed thousands of pilgrims from across history, figures in robes spanning 3 millennia of imperial fashion, all kneeling in perfect prayer formation. Their forms flickered between temporal states, existing simultaneously as children, adults, and elderly penitents, as if time itself had become unstuck and every moment of their lives occupied the same physical space. The pilgrims prayed in perfect synchronization, their lips moving in rhythm with the knocking that echoed through the chamber. My chronometer continued its backward count toward a moment that had never existed, measuring time that flowed against causality itself. Then, as one, every pilgrim turned their head toward us, their eyes reflecting light that came from centuries past and future simultaneously. The crystalline chamber stretched beyond comprehension, like a cathedral carved from living time itself, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent conduits that sang harmonics older than the Immaterium. Air shimmered with temporal distortions that made reality ripple like disturbed water, each wave carrying echoes of prayers spoken across millennia. The Age of Apostasy's militant hymns, braided with present-day litanies, in acoustic palimpsest that layered devotion across centuries, creating music from mathematics of faith transformed into chronological currency. I stepped forward onto crystal floors that supported my weight, while simultaneously revealing the chamber's existence across 3,000 years of history. Through transparent barriers, thin as cathedral glass, pilgrims from different eras occupied identical physical space in temporal layers that flickered between past and future with mechanical precision. Penitents in rough-spun robes from the shrine, world's founding, knelt beside nobles in elaborate devotional garb from imperial expansion's height, their forms overlapping yet distinct, existing in quantum superposition that made my enhanced vision struggle to process contradictory information. The air tasted of ozone, and sanctified oils turned rancid, each breath carrying molecules that existed in multiple temporal states simultaneously. My rosarius hummed with increasing agitation against my throat, its blessed machine spirit responding to forces that violated fundamental constants of reality. Temperature fluctuated in patterns corresponding to historical events, cooling during periods of imperial decline, warming during moments of great faith, creating atmospheric palimpsest that accommodated respiratory systems, adapted to various planetary conditions across centuries. Tempestus Scion Mordak experienced the first violent temporal displacement as we advanced deeper into the chamber. His scarred features aged a decade in 3 heartbeats, hair greying at temples, skin weathering with lines that spoke of battles not yet fought, augmetic implants showing wear patterns from decades of service. Then the effect reversed with brutal precision, flesh tightening, tendons strengthening, returning him to his current age, while leaving him gasping with memories of experiences that existed in future tense. "Emperor's blood," he whispered, his voice carrying undertones of temporal echo that made each word resonate across multiple chronological frequencies. I remember dying. I remember growing old in the trenches of worlds not yet discovered. I remember things that haven't happened yet. Tekmarin Valeth's augmetics began displaying schematics for technology that wouldn't be invented for millennia. Weapon systems operating on principles beyond current imperial understanding. Cogitator designs incorporating organic neural networks. Spacecraft that traveled through folded space-time rather than the warp. His mechadendrites twitched with temporal discharge as data streams from impossible futures flooded his enhanced consciousness. "These are not corrupted machine spirits," he reported, his augmetic larynx struggling to process concepts that violated techno-theological orthodoxy. "These are machine spirits that exist outside linear causality, accessing information from temporal coordinates extending beyond the heat-death of the universe. The Chronos field density here exceeds all theoretical parameters. The pilgrims surrounding us existed in states that defied classification as living or dead. They breathed with rhythm of prayer, rather than biological necessity, their chests rising and falling in perfect synchronization with litanies echoing across centuries. Each figure experienced their final moments of faith in eternal loop, the instant of perfect devotion that preceded whatever transformation had claimed them, repeated endlessly across different temporal streams, like prayers tightened until they sang. A child pilgrim from the shrine, worlds founding, flickered between states of innocence and corruption, small hands clutching prayer beads that aged and renewed themselves in 9-second intervals. Beside her, an elderly cardinal from the age of apostasy raised his crozier in blessing that never completed, the gesture frozen at maximum spiritual intensity. A guardswoman's hands trembled over a tourniquet that never tightened, because the moment that gave it purpose was always arriving. Their prayers formed harmonic patterns resonating through crystalline walls, creating temporal hymns from faith converted into chronological energy. Through data slates recovered from crystalline alcoves that phased between visibility and transparency, I discovered ancient Mechanicus, records revealing the chamber's true purpose. The planet had been hollowed out during the dark age of technology as experimental temporal stabilization matrix designed to anchor specific points in space-time against entropic forces threatening to unravel causality itself. The Adeptus Mechanicus had attempted to create artificial stability in regions where the warp's influence made linear time impossible to maintain. Designation: Chronometric Stabilization Matrix Site 99 Beta Lyralae, Valeth translated from glowing text that resolved within crystalline lecterns grown from the chamber's substance. Purpose: suppress tidal share between probabilistic futures and observed present by binding human observation to fixed lattice. Faith is observation multiplied by unity. The ecclesiarchy's later sanctification represented theological ignorance rather than divine inspiration. They had mistaken temporal phenomena for miraculous healings, interpreting the Matrix's ability to restore subjects to previous temporal states as evidence of saintly intervention. For 3 millennia, pilgrims had unknowingly fed their faith into systems converting devotional energy into chronological stability, their prayers powering technology that kept reality anchored against forces seeking to dissolve boundaries between past and future. Nonagonal patterns dominated the chamber's architecture with increasing complexity as we approached its center, glowing with internal light that pulsed in synchronization with the 9-second fluctuations governing everything here. They were not merely decorative, but operational, conduits, circuits, visible manifestations of the Chronos engine's fundamental principles. Each 9-sided facet resonated with the chamber's rhythm, creating subliminal pressure that made the air itself hum with mathematical precision. The chamber's center drew my attention with gravitational force having nothing to do with planetary mass. There, elevated on crystalline dais, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns in non-agonal configurations, stood a sarcophagus carved from single piece of temporal crystal. The container's walls revealed contents with clarity that made my enhanced vision recoil from processing impossible imagery. St. Lyralae herself lay within, but not in any state corresponding to conventional understanding of life or death. Her body phased between different ages with mechanical precision, child to maiden, to mother to crone to corpse, then cycling back to child in endless temporal loop encompassing every moment of her existence simultaneously. Each transformation brought different expressions of faith, from innocent devotion to mature understanding to final transcendence, creating visual palimpsest of spiritual development compressed into single physical form. The saint's robes shifted between rough-spun cloth of humble origins and elaborate vestments of canonization, while her hands alternately clutched simple prayer beads and ornate reliquaries existing across multiple time periods. Her face showed peaceful expression of one who had achieved perfect communion with the Emperor, yet also bore marks of suffering, speaking of martyrdom endured across infinite temporal iterations. As I approached the sarcophagus, drawn by forces beyond conscious control, temperature rose to human warmth for the first time since entering the hollow planet. My rosarius vibrated against my throat with harmonic frequencies that matched the chamber's temporal rhythm, creating resonance that made reality itself ring like struck bell. The saint's eyes opened with sudden violence that made the air flinch around us. They stared directly at me across temporal barriers that should have prevented such contact, pupils dilating and contracting in rhythm with my own heartbeat. Her gaze held knowledge of past and future simultaneously, ancient wisdom layered with prophetic understanding that transcended mortal comprehension. When she spoke, her voice carried across centuries, with clarity bypassing my ears entirely, resonating directly in my enhanced consciousness, with words that existed in all tenses simultaneously. You have come to complete the circle, Interrogator Vex. You have always been coming. You will always be here. The Emperor's design requires your choice, and you have already made it across every possible timeline. St. Lorelei existed within the crystalline sarcophagus, like a litany trapped between breaths, every moment of her existence superimposed, until reality refused to resolve the contradiction. Child saint clutching primitive prayer beads, transformed into martyred maiden-bearing stigmata, aged into wise crone dispensing benedictions, decayed into blessed corpse, then resurrected as innocent child, beginning the cycle anew. Each transformation lasted exactly 9 seconds, creating temporal rhythm that synchronized with the chamber's bioluminescent pulse, and made my enhanced vision struggle to process contradictory states of being existing simultaneously in the same physical space. This wasn't corruption in any form I had encountered during 37 years of inquisitorial service. No taint of chaos whispered through her cycling forms. No heretical influence corrupted her essence. Only fundamental flaw in the saint's canonization that created wound in causality itself. Lorelei had been martyred while standing directly on the temporal matrix, her moment of perfect faith occurring at coordinates where past and future collapsed into singular point of infinite possibility. Her death echoed across all possible timelines, creating resonance cascade that anchored every potential version of her martyrdom to the same physical location, while the crystalline chamber served as failing containment field. The paradox manifested as environmental chaos that transformed the chamber into maelstrom of temporal violence. Gravity lurched sideways, then down, then away, each change arriving in 9-beat cadence that matched the planet's cold pulse. The air aged visibly, silvering, crackling, frosting our lumen strips with brittle rime, then renewed in warm gusts that smelled of incense freshly swung, and sanctified oils turned rancid. Light separated from itself, prismatic doubles lagging by heartbeats, before snapping back as reality concluded arguments with its own reflection. My boots adhered to crystalline floors, as if devotion rather than mass decided whether I belonged to any surface. Tempestus Scion Mordak gasped as his back bowed under invisible decades, white stubble erupting along his scalp, before vanishing in the same breath, leaving him panting with memories of trenches under forgotten skies. I married, he whispered to no one. I died kneeling on Cadia, during the 13th Black Crusade. I served across 10,000 years of possible futures. Which life is real? Tekmarine Valeth staggered as his augmetics bifurcated into competing schemata, one arm becoming lattice of grown crystal conducting data as song, the other encased in brass of archaic pattern, displaying hololithic sigils for engineering not yet dreamt, warpless translation engines, self-editing logic trees, sanctified equations that insisted on being prayers. My own consciousness fragmented across temporal possibilities, experiencing visions of births I never had, deaths I hadn't died, futures where I served as Inquisitor Lord or fell to heretical corruption. Each vision carried complete sensory detail that layered until distinguishing between lived memory and temporal echo became impossible. The experiences existed simultaneously, creating paradox that made my Rosarius hum with distress against my throat. St. Lyrelei's voice layered the chamber without moving her lips, arriving as scripture taught backwards, prophecy couched in grammar of aftermath, choir that was one throat multiplied by centuries. I have been faithful. I have been heretical. I have been both. I have been neither. Which prayer do you answer, interrogator Vex, the words pressed against bone like hands, gentle and implacable, carrying weight of theological paradox that violated fundamental tenets of imperial doctrine. How could the same soul exist in states of perfect faith and absolute heresy simultaneously? The answer emerged through data streams flowing from crystalline lecterns that phased between visibility and transparency, revealing bureaucratic horror that dwarfed theological concerns. Administratum records spanning 3 millennia showed deliberate scheduling of pilgrimages to feed the temporal matrix, using faith as stabilizing force to prevent reality collapse. Each major feast day brought precisely calculated numbers of pilgrims whose devotional energy would be converted into chronological stability, their prayers powering systems that kept causality anchored against entropic forces. Designation: Faith to Chronos Conversion Protocol. Valeth translated from glowing text. Resolving within the chamber's walls, his vocoder clipping vowels as 2 futures argued in his throat. Pilgrimage schedules calculated to maintain matrix stability through devotional energy harvesting. Estimated faithful required per annum: 18,000 souls minimum for baseline stability, 81,000 for optimal temporal anchoring. The administratum had transformed pilgrimage into industrial process, measuring faith in units of chronological stability rather than spiritual fulfillment. Centuries of carefully orchestrated devotion had fed the matrix, each prayer converted into temporal energy that prevented the saint's paradox from expanding beyond containment. Rubber stamps translated into bloodless euphemism, and behind each euphemism I heard voices like mine, steady, dutiful, filing sins where they would never trouble the pious. Containment is failing, Valeth warned as his mechadendrites tapped crystal with ritual gentleness, the material answering in chord I felt in teeth and spine. She is the fulcrum and the fault, Chronos field density fluctuating beyond safe parameters, the saint's cycling accelerated, temporal phases blurring until she existed as composite being, encompassing all possible states simultaneously. Her eyes opened across all phases, staring at me with knowledge of past and future, layered into single moment of terrible understanding. The choice approaches, interrogator. The loop must be completed or broken. Faith requires sacrifice. But sacrifice requires faith. Cracks skated across the sarcophagus with delicate poise, like ice deciding whether to take weight. They traced non-agonal patterns, then defied them, preferring 3-beat vectors that answered the hollow knocks echoing through crystalline walls. Light bled from fissures, not illumination, but the idea of it escaping confinement as temperature climbed to human summer. Through widening breaks, instead of the temporal nave surrounding us, another place asserted itself with calm of judge taking his bench. The bridge of the righteous inquiry assembled out of angles and duty, iron bulkheads, incense braziers guttering obediently, navigators hooded like penitent crows. I saw myself standing straight-backed before the mission hololith, hands folded to hide tremor, receiving the briefing that had brought us here, while my past self raised her hand to accept the mission that would lead inevitably to this chamber, this confrontation, this impossible choice. The temporal loop revealed itself as closed circuit, investigation causing the very phenomena it sought to understand, effect preceding cause in violation of linear causality. As the sarcophagus sighed like something remembering how to breathe, I understood with certainty that makes faith indistinguishable from doom. The loop had always been the prayer, and we had been bowing to its perfection since before we learned our knees. The predestination paradox revealed itself with surgical precision that made my enhanced mind recoil from processing its implications. The mission briefing I had received aboard the Righteous Inquiry existed as my own future report, transmitted backward through the temporal matrix with mechanical inevitability. Every word I had spoken, every tactical decision, every moment of growing dread, all scripted by my future self, who had already experienced this confrontation. The investigation was not discovery, but predetermined ritual, each step tightening the loop of causality around us, like blessed chains forged from temporal impossibility. The crystalline chamber began resonating with harmonic frequencies that made reality itself ring like a cathedral bell struck by invisible hand. Each vibration penetrated enhanced bone and ceramite armor, creating sympathetic resonance in my Rosarius that synchronized with the temporal matrix's 9-second pulse until distinguishing between blessed machine spirit distress and environmental phenomena became impossible. The sound carried undertones of prayers spoken across millennia, creating acoustic palimpsest that layered devotion into chronological currency. Air shimmered with temporal distortions that refracted light into spectrums that hurt to perceive, while gravity fluctuated in patterns corresponding to historical events, strengthening during periods of imperial triumph, weakening during ages of decline. The chamber's bioluminescent conduits pulsed with increasing frequency, their 9-second intervals compressing toward singular moment where all timelines would converge. St. Lyraleigh's paradox spread through the chamber like viral hymn, causing my team to experience multiple timelines simultaneously as containment failed with mathematical precision. Tempestus Scion Mordak flickered between his current form and childhood memories made manifest, adult warrior overlapping with 10-year-old boy clutching toy lasgun on Cadia's training grounds. Both versions existed in the same physical space while speaking in temporal counterpoint. "I remember my first kill," he whispered, through lips that belonged to both man and child. "I remember being afraid of the dark. Orders, interrogator," he said in two voices at once, one steady as a firing line, the other thin as a reed in a gale. His scarred features aged and renewed in rhythm with the chamber's pulse, creating visual palimpsest of life experience compressed into single moment. Techmarine Valeth's augmetics began receiving data streams from the dark age of technology, his mechadendrites twitching with temporal discharge as information from humanity's lost golden age flooded his enhanced consciousness. Schematics for standard template. Constructs scrolled across his optical displays alongside weapon designs that operated on principles beyond current imperial understanding. Input, pre-imperial design schema. Cross-reference, no archive, he reported, his voice layering across multiple chronological frequencies. Warning, sanctity breach. The machine spirit of this place remembers a future it has not yet survived. The true horror crystallized with clarity that made my faith waver for the first time in 37 years of inquisitorial service. Every inquisitor sent to investigate St. Lyraleigh's hollow became part of the temporal loop, their investigations causing the very anomalies they came to stop. I saw others as the chamber resonated, A procession of rosette-bearers marched along the crystal walls like motes in a lumen beam, hard-eyed witch-finders, weary scholars, kill-court barons. Each descended with evidence, with purity seals, with answers. Each became record, then rumor, then liturgical marginalia. We are not the first, I realized, speaking to crystalline walls that reflected my voice across centuries. We are the same mission repeated endlessly, each iteration creating the conditions that require the next. The horror should have been the theology. It wasn't. It was the paperwork. The Administratum had been feeding us to this paradox for 3 millennia, each investigation filed with mechanical precision that transformed duty into industrial sacrifice. St. Lyrelai's voice layered the chamber without requiring breath, arriving as theological argument made audible across temporal barriers. Her cycling forms, child, maiden, mother, crone, corpse, spoke as one. The choice approaches, interrogator vex. Break the loop by preventing my martyrdom, and erase 3 millennia of faith, miracles, and imperial spiritual foundation. Accept eternal repetition, and preserve the Immaterium's soul at the cost of linear causality. Environmental chaos escalated as the saint's paradox reached critical mass. Temperature rose to human warmth, while atmospheric pressure made breathing feel like benediction. The chamber's crystalline walls developed stress fractures as containment approached failure. 3 hollow knocks climbed from the depths, answered by 3 from above, creating rhythm that matched my heartbeat until I could not tell if the chamber was learning my pulse or my pulse was learning the chamber. The loop requires completion or destruction, the saint continued, her voice carrying weight of theological certainty. Faith demands sacrifice, but sacrifice requires faith. Choose, interrogator. Choose as you have always chosen. I reached toward the cracking sarcophagus with hand that trembled despite enhanced muscular control, drawn by forces beyond conscious decision. The crystalline surface felt warm against my palm, pulsing with rhythm that synchronized with my heartbeat. Reality flexed like leather, pulled wet over a form as I pressed closer to the moment of choice that would define not just my fate, but the fate of every soul who had ever prayed in the Emperor's name. My vox bead crackled with transmission that made my enhanced hearing recoil. The signal originated from Cardinal Morteus's approaching fleet carrying 200,000 pilgrims, but the voice speaking, with authority of canonized saint, belonged unmistakably to me. Faithful of the Immaterium, rejoice! Witness the miracle of eternal faith. St. Lyrelai welcomes you to transcendence beyond linear time, where devotion becomes eternal and prayer achieves perfect repetition. The transmission continued with words I had never spoken, announcing miracles I had never witnessed, promising salvation through sacrifice I had not yet accepted. Yet the voice was mine, speaking with conviction that transcended temporal barriers, while 200,000 souls approached their destiny, guided by prophecy, transmitted from future that had already become past. The voice that hailed the pilgrims in my name bled across every open channel like a gilded knife cutting prayer into obedience, each syllable transmitted backward through the temporal matrix with mechanical precision that spoke of orchestration spanning centuries. Cardinal Morteus's approaching fleet represented not salvation, but predetermined damnation, each vessel carrying souls toward temporal consumption, with inevitability that violated every principle of free will I had sworn to defend. through data streams flowing from crystalline lecterns that phased between visibility and transparency. The Cardinal's true identity resolved with surgical clarity that made my enhanced mind recoil from processing its implications. Telemetry from the Righteous Inquiry painted the approaching fleet in false color displays that revealed impossible configurations, while cross-referenced seal codes hidden in encrypted beacons returned a designation that froze breath in my rebreather. Mortius was no prelate. He was Inquisitor Mordian Kale of the Ordo Kronos, declared missing 3 centuries ago during investigation of temporal anomalies in the Segmentum Solar. He had accepted the saint's bargain, trading linear existence for eternal stewardship of the temporal matrix, while orchestrating pilgrimages to feed the paradox engine with faith converted into chronological stability. Fleet composition indicates temporal displacement across multiple chronological coordinates, Techmarine Valeth reported, his augmetic systems interfacing with data streams that violated machine spirit orthodoxy. The vessels exist in quantum superposition. Simultaneously, ancient reliquaries from the age of apostasy and modern pilgrim barges constructed in shipyards that won't exist for centuries. The planet's hollow core began collapsing as the temporal matrix destabilized beyond safe parameters, crystalline walls developing stress fractures that sang with harmonic frequencies matching the chamber's accelerating pulse. Environmental chaos escalated with mathematical precision, gravity lurching between orientations, while atmospheric pressure fluctuated in patterns corresponding to historical events. The 9-second intervals that had governed temporal fluctuations compressed toward singular moment, where all timelines would converge, creating resonance cascade that threatened Chronos singularity formation. Projected casualty assessment, Valeth intoned, his voice layering across multiple chronological frequencies. Chronos singularity expansion would trap 17 sectors in temporal loops of infinite duration. No exit from recursion. Billions experiencing eternal repetition of final moments without possibility of escape or death. Religious horror intensified as St. Lyrale's cycling forms revealed the true cost of her miracles through visions transmitted directly into my enhanced consciousness. The pilgrims approaching in Cardinal Morteus's fleet weren't simply dying. They were being edited out of history itself, their existence feeding the paradox engine, while their memories, achievements, and bloodlines dissolved from imperial records with surgical precision. Each act of faith performed in the saint's name across 3 millennia required corresponding sacrifice in the temporal matrix, creating balance between devotional energy and chronological stability that demanded constant feeding. I witnessed the horror through temporal distortions that made reality ripple like disturbed water. A young woman's face, radiant with devotion, praying at a shrine's base, only for her image to blur, dissolve into crystalline walls, leaving behind negative space where a soul had once existed. Her life was not merely ended but unmade, her memories absorbed into the matrix, her existence rewritten as never having been. Families would forget children who had never been born. Regiments would lose soldiers whose service had never occurred. The ultimate religious horror, not damnation, but erasure, unwritten from the book of life, not by sin, but by faith itself. Tempestus Scion Mordak steadied his aim on nothing and everything, child and veteran parting within him, like curtains in temporal draught, before rejoining with violent precision. "Orders, interrogator," he said in two voices simultaneously, one steady as firing line, the other thin as reed in gale. His courage made liturgy feel smaller, and I loved him for it in the way commanders are allowed, by intending he should die last. The moral calculus crystallized with brutal clarity that made my enhanced mind struggle to process implications. Allow 200,000 pilgrims to be consumed by the Matrix, and their faith would stabilize the temporal paradox for another millennium, while their existence was edited from history. Prevent their sacrifice, and the Chronos singularity would expand beyond containment, trapping 17 sectors in temporal loops, where billions would experience eternal repetition without possibility of escape. St. Lyrelai's voice layered the chamber with theological certainty that transcended temporal barriers. The choice has always been between limited damnation and infinite suffering, interrogator Vex. The Emperor's design requires sacrifice on scales that dwarf individual comprehension. Faith demands mathematics. Mathematics demands sacrifice. Above us, the void filled with Cardinal Morteus's armada, ships venting sanctified vapor from their prows, in contrails that painted devotional patterns against crystalline atmosphere. The planet answered with chord that made our teeth ring, while the chamber buckled, as if bowing under weight of collective faith, striking the temporal matrix. "Drop pods inbound," Mordak reported through temporal displacement that made his voice echo across decades. Trajectory arrays indicate convergence on our coordinates rather than standard deployment pattern. The pods descended through crystalline atmosphere like falling stars, but thermal imaging revealed impossible cargo manifests. Instead of reinforcements, each pod contained different version of myself from alternate timelines. Interrogator Cassia Vex, who had made different choices, accepted different missions, served different aspects of the Emperor's will. Some wore robes of canoness, others bore augmetic modifications of tech priests. Several displayed corruption scars, speaking of battles against chaos that had claimed more than flesh. All converged on the same moment of choice, with mechanical inevitability that spoke of predestination beyond mortal understanding. The chamber filled with versions of myself, each representing different path through temporal maze, yet all leading to this confrontation, this impossible decision that would determine the fate of 17 sectors. Cardinal Morteus's voice crackled through Vox channels existing outside linear time. "Choose, interrogators. Choose as you have always chosen. The Emperor's design requires completion, and the faithful await transcendence into eternal devotion." The first drop pod irised open with mechanical precision that spoke of temporal displacement rather than atmospheric entry, releasing another version of myself into the crystalline chamber's impossible geometry. She wore the matte black augmetics of a tech priest militant, data tethers trailing like sacred vestments, while her optical mechadendrites tracked environmental anomalies with inhuman precision. Behind her emerged Canoness Cassia, resplendent in power armor, bearing devotional scarification that told stories of faith tested beyond mortal endurance, her bolt pistol held in hands that trembled with righteous fury rather than fear. Each alternate version carried the weight of different choices like rosaries of consequence, their eyes reflecting knowledge of paths I had yet to walk, while their presence created convergence point where all possible outcomes existed simultaneously. The tech priest Cassia spoke in Binharic cant layered with high Gothic. Probability matrices indicate temporal cascade failure imminent. Choice point approaches critical threshold. Her words carried certainty of mathematical inevitability that made my enhanced mind recoil from processing implications. The crystalline chamber fractured across multiple dimensions like cathedral, glass struck by invisible hammer, its walls revealing glimpses of realities where different decisions had shaped the galaxy's fate. Through transparent barriers, thin as prayer parchment, I witnessed Immaterium consumed by chaos during the Horus heresy, golden eagles replaced by 8 pointed stars, while humanity served darker masters with devotion that mocked everything I held sacred. Another dimension showed Saint Lirelei, never martyred, living to peaceful old age, while the temporal matrix remained dormant, leaving the galaxy vulnerable to Kronos, storms that unraveled causality sector by sector. Most disturbing was reality, where the dark age of technology never ended, where humanity had transcended mortality through temporal manipulation rather than faith. Their cities existed as crystalline spheres like this chamber, citizens cycling through temporal states with mechanical precision that made Saint Lirelei's paradox seem primitive by comparison. They had achieved immortality at the cost of becoming living equations, consciousness reduced to mathematical functions operating across infinite timelines. Body horror escalated as alternate versions of myself began merging and separating with violence that violated fundamental laws of identity and consciousness. Memories bled between iterations, like sacred oils mixing in corrupted chalice. I experienced childhood on Cadia that belonged to another Cassia, felt augmetic implants piercing flesh I'd never modified, carried scars from battles against demons whose names I'd never learned. Each merger brought complete sensory experience of lives unlived, creating palimpsest of existence that made distinguishing between authentic memory and temporal echo impossible. The Canoness Cassia's devotional scars burned against skin I didn't possess, while Tech Priest Cassia's augmetic memories flooded my consciousness with machine spirit communion and forbidden knowledge. A third version bore corruption marks, speaking of contact with forces beyond imperial comprehension, her experiences whispering promises of power through surrender to entropy itself. We were theological argument made flesh, each representing different interpretation of duty, faith, and sacrifice. St. Lirelei's paradox reached critical mass as she manifested physically in all temporal states simultaneously, no longer confined to cycling forms within crystalline sarcophagus. Child saint knelt in innocent prayer beside martyr saint bearing stigmata of perfect suffering, while wise crone dispensed benedictions and blessed corpse radiated sanctity of transcendent death. All existed in identical physical space, creating visual discord that made reality itself seem negotiable, subject to revision by forces operating according to devotional mathematics rather than physics. Environmental chaos reached crescendo as non-agonal patterns carved themselves into fracturing walls with increasing complexity, each 9-sided configuration pulsing with bioluminescent energy that synchronized with the chamber's accelerating temporal rhythm. Gravity operated according to faith rather than mass, while atmospheric pressure fluctuated in patterns corresponding to galactic events across multiple timelines. The air tasted of ozone and sanctified oils existing in quantum superposition between blessed and corrupted states. Tempestus Scion Mordak existed in quantum superposition between veteran warrior and fallen soldier, his form flickering between states while he simultaneously demanded orders and lay dying from las burns across multiple battlefields. Techmarine Valeth's Augmetics displayed schematics from realities where the Omnissiah's mysteries had been fully revealed, his consciousness fragmenting across technological possibilities that spanned primitive machinery to godlike artificial intelligence. Both remained suspended between existence and void until my choice would collapse the probability wave into singular outcome. The true scope of threat revealed itself through data streams flowing from multidimensional displays, painting galactic map dotted with similar sites across the Imperium's breadth. The temporal matrix wasn't isolated phenomenon, but node in galaxy-spanning network, maintained by identical cycles of sacrifice and faith. Each shrine world, each cathedral, each site of miraculous healing, connected to temporal engines converting devotional energy into chronological stability with industrial efficiency. Network designation: Imperial Temporal Stabilization Grid. Tech Priest Cassia translated from glowing text resolving within crystalline walls. 10,000 sites maintaining causality against entropic forces. Faith to Chronos conversion rate: 93% efficiency. Annual consumption: 800 million souls minimum for baseline temporal stability. The Imperium's entire spiritual foundation rested on temporal manipulation, requiring constant feeding, each prayer converted into chronological currency, while faithful who offered them were edited from history with surgical precision. The Emperor's protection demanded sacrifice on scales dwarfing individual comprehension, creating system where faith became industrial process, consuming souls to power machinery, keeping reality anchored against forces seeking to dissolve boundaries between past and future. Temperature climbed to human warmth as convergence approached peak intensity, while the chamber's harmonic frequencies made reality ring like struck bell. The 9-second intervals governing temporal fluctuations compressed toward singular moment, where all possibilities would collapse into inevitable choice that would determine fate of human consciousness itself. As understanding crystallized with surgical precision, I realized existence of ninth choice, transcending binary of preservation or destruction. The option required accepting martyrdom across all timelines, becoming saint myself while stabilizing paradox permanently, through sacrifice echoing across every possible reality, not breaking the loop or accepting eternal repetition, but becoming the equation that solved itself through infinite iterations. St. Liralay's voice layered the chamber with prophetic certainty that penetrated enhanced bone and ceramite armor. The Emperor's design requires anchor point existing outside linear causality. Interrogator Vex. Faith demands mathematics. Mathematics demands sacrifice. Choose to become the constant that makes all variables possible. The alternate versions of myself turned as one, their eyes reflecting knowledge of choice that had always been inevitable, while crystalline chamber prepared to collapse all possibility into singular moment of transformation that would reshape the fundamental nature of imperial faith itself. The sarcophagus revealed its true nature as understanding crystallized with surgical precision that made my enhanced mind recoil from processing implications spanning millennia. This was no burial chamber, but a martyrdom engine, Dark Age technology, disguised as sacred reliquary, designed to convert temporal paradoxes into faith-based energy through controlled sacrifice that anchored specific points in space-time against entropic forces. The saint's cycling forms provided perpetual fuel, her martyrdom repeated across infinite iterations, while generating chronological stability that prevented reality from dissolving into quantum chaos, where causality held no meaning. My rosarius hummed against my throat with increasing agitation as environmental revelation struck with mathematical inevitability. The entire hollow planet functioned as massive chronometer, its crystalline structure measuring and containing temporal anomalies on galactic scale with precision that dwarfed imperial comprehension. Each cathedral's spire served as temporal antenna, broadcasting stabilization frequencies across sectors while monitoring Chronos field fluctuations that threatened linear causality. The non-agonal patterns carved into every surface represented operational circuitry, conduits channeling faith energy through systems converting devotional mathematics into temporal anchoring. Designation: Planetary Chronometric Array, Sant Class, Techmarine Valeth translated from glowing text resolving within fracturing crystalline walls, his augmetic larynx struggling to process concepts that violated machine spirit orthodoxy. Purpose: maintain imperial temporal stability through martyrdom-based energy conversion. Faith coefficient: optimal. Sacrifice quotient: perpetual. Status: operational for 3 millennia, approaching critical transition phase requiring new anchor point. The true horror transcended individual understanding as galactic scope revealed itself through cross-referenced data spanning 10,000 years of imperial history. Every canonized saint connected to similar temporal matrices, their miracles powered by controlled paradoxes that edited reality to maintain the Imperium's existence against forces seeking to unravel human civilization. St. Sebastian's healing springs drew power from temporal loops, where his martyrdom echoed across multiple timelines. St. Euphrates' visions emerged from Chronos engines, converting her prophetic death into probability manipulation that guided imperial expansion through treacherous galactic currents. Religious horror deepened as understanding crystallized that faith itself had been weaponized, not against chaos as imperial doctrine taught, but against entropy and natural flow of time that threatened to dissolve human empire into historical inevitability. The Emperor's protection operated through temporal manipulation, requiring constant feeding, each prayer converted into chronological currency, while faithful who offered them provided fuel for machinery, keeping reality anchored against forces that sought to return the galaxy to primordial chaos. Environmental chaos escalated as the chamber's harmonic frequencies made reality ring like struck bell, while temperature climbed toward human warmth that felt like benediction after the cold emptiness of temporal displacement. Gravity operated according to devotional mathematics rather than planetary mass, creating zones where faith determined physical law, while atmospheric pressure fluctuated in patterns corresponding to imperial history across multiple timelines. Tempestus Scion Mordak experienced violent temporal displacement as convergence approached critical threshold, his form flickering between veteran warrior and dying soldier, while simultaneously existing as frightened child clutching toy lasgun on Cadia's training grounds. "Orders, interrogator," he whispered, in voices spanning decades, his scarred features aging and renewing with mechanical precision that spoke of temporal loops beyond mortal comprehension. His courage remained constant across all iterations, duty transcending chronological boundaries. Valeth's augmetics displayed schematics from realities where the Omnissiah's mysteries had been fully revealed, technology operating on principles that incorporated organic neural networks and spacecraft traveling through folded space-time rather than warp navigation. These systems predate Imperial understanding by millennia, he reported, mechadendrites interfacing with crystalline conduits that sang with data streams older than human civilization. The martyrdom engine converts faith into temporal currency through processes that violate every law of thermodynamics. Through multidimensional displays showing Cardinal Mortius's approaching pilgrim fleet, I witnessed 200,000 souls prepared for transcendence through sacrifice they could not comprehend. They were not victims, but necessary components in galaxy-spanning mechanism that prevented the Imperium from collapsing under weight of its own contradictions. 10,000 years of expansion and bureaucratic complexity that should have dissolved into chaos without artificial temporal anchoring, powered by industrial-scale faith harvesting. The alternate versions of myself stood in perfect formation around the martyrdom engine, each representing different path through temporal maze, yet all converging on identical understanding. Their presence created convergence point, where all possibilities would collapse into singular moment of choice that would determine the fate of 17 sectors and countless souls whose existence depended on continued temporal stability. As I approached the sarcophagus, drawn by forces beyond conscious decision, the crystalline surface felt alive beneath my palm, pulsing with rhythm that synchronized with heartbeat until distinguishing between biological function and temporal machinery became impossible. The chamber prepared for transformation as stress fractures developed across crystalline walls, singing with frequencies that matched galactic rotation, while reality itself prepared to accommodate new temporal anchor. Through the engine's transparent barriers, I witnessed faces radiant with devotion aboard the approaching pilgrim vessels, souls whose faith would power the Matrix for another millennium, while their existence was edited from history with surgical precision. Children would forget parents who had never lived. Regiments would lose soldiers whose service had never occurred. The ultimate religious horror, erasure disguised as salvation, unmaking presented as eternal life through faith, converted into chronological stability. St. Lyraleigh's cycling forms synchronized as I prepared to enter the sarcophagus and accept temporal martyrdom that would anchor my consciousness across infinite iterations, becoming constant that made all variables possible. Child, maiden, mother, crone, corpse, all phases aligned toward singular moment of prophetic revelation. Her voice carried across centuries with weight of theological certainty that penetrated enhanced bone and ceramite armor. The Emperor knows, Interrogator Vex. He is always known. This is his will made manifest across eternity, and the Golden Throne itself serves as martyrdom engine on scale beyond planetary comprehension. The Emperor's consciousness struck my enhanced awareness with force that transcended physical contact, his presence flooding through temporal conduits that bypassed mortal limitations and spoke directly to the architecture of the soul itself. The crystalline chamber dissolved around us, like prayer parchment touched by flame, reality reshaping itself into vision of the golden throne, where he sat at an eternal vigil. Neither alive nor dead, but existing in quantum superposition that served as master template for every temporal paradox anchoring human civilization across the galaxy. His withered form pulsed with Chronos energy that made St. Lyralei's cycling seem primitive by comparison, each labored breath spanning centuries, while his consciousness operated across multiple timelines simultaneously. The 3 hollow knocks that had echoed through the chamber revealed themselves as calibration pulses transmitted from the palace itself, heartbeats of a being who had forgotten the distinction between flesh and machine, prayer and power, mercy and the mathematics of continuation itself. Through his eyes, I witnessed the construction of the Immaterium across 10,000 years of calculated orchestration that dwarfed mortal comprehension. The Great Crusade had not been expansion, but temporal anchoring operation, each conquered world providing foundation for Chronos engines disguised as cathedrals and shrines. The Horus heresy itself served as deliberate crisis, creating trauma points in galactic consciousness that would generate faith energy for millennia, while establishing temporal loops around his own martyrdom on the walls of the imperial palace. Every saint, every miracle, every moment of transcendent faith has been precisely orchestrated to create stable temporal loops preventing humanity's extinction. His voice resonated through my consciousness, without requiring breath or vocal cords, each word carrying weight of absolute certainty. Mercy, in this lexicon, means continuation. Faith is observation multiplied by unity. Observation collapses probability. Collapsed probability becomes ground upon which species can stand against extinction. Environmental transcendence replaced the chamber's fracturing walls with visions spanning galactic history, showing how each crisis had been engineered to generate specific quantities of devotional energy. The age of apostasy's religious wars provided trauma-based faith conversion that powered temporal engines through 3 millennia of imperial expansion. St. Sebastian's healing miracles drew power from temporal loops, where his martyrdom echoed across multiple timelines, each iteration generating faith energy converted into biological restoration through controlled paradox manipulation. The Golden Throne revealed its true nature as galaxy-spanning martyrdom engine, operating on principles that incorporated organic neural networks and quantum consciousness manipulation. His withered form served as biological component in machinery that converted human souls into temporal currency, each psyche sacrifice powering not just the Astronomicon, but temporal engines that edited reality to ensure humanity's survival against entropic forces seeking to return the galaxy to primordial chaos. Tempestus Scion Mordak experienced resolution as his temporal displacement stabilized, veteran warrior and frightened child merging into singular consciousness that bore memories of battles across multiple timelines. "The Emperor protects," he stated, his voice no longer layered with temporal echoes, but carrying certainty that transcended individual understanding. His scarred features reflected peace of one who had witnessed the mathematical perfection underlying apparent chaos. Tech marine valeths, augmetics synchronized with the chamber's harmonic frequencies, his mechadendrites extending toward crystalline conduits that sang with data streams older than human civilization. The Omnisire is the Emperor. The machine spirit is temporal consciousness made manifest in causality. The flesh is weak, but the will is eternal across infinite iterations, he intoned, his voice carrying weight of techno-theological revelation that unified all apparent contradictions. The horror crystallized with surgical clarity that made my Rosarius hum in harmony rather than distress against my throat. The system wasn't corrupt. It worked exactly as intended, requiring infinite sacrifice to maintain infinite faith, while preventing humanity's natural extinction through temporal anchoring that violated every law of causality. Free will itself had been sacrificed to ensure species survival, every choice predetermined by probability engines operating according to devotional mathematics rather than individual agency. Religious revelation penetrated my consciousness with force that transcended theological understanding. The Emperor's protection of humanity required consumption of human souls, not just to power the Astronomicon, but to fuel temporal engines that edited reality at quantum level. Each prayer offered by faithful across the galaxy provided fuel for machinery, keeping causality anchored while their consciousness was absorbed into collective faith matrix that transcended individual existence. 10,000 shrine worlds operated as nodes in galaxy-spanning network, each converting devotional energy into chronological stability with industrial efficiency. Through multi-dimensional displays showing Cardinal Morteus's approaching pilgrim fleet, I witnessed cargo more precious than 200,000 pilgrim souls. Hidden within devotional vessels lay components for new temporal matrix, crystalline conduits grown from living faith, quantum processors incorporating organic neural networks, Chronos engines designed to anchor the Emperor's resurrection by creating paradox loop around his own death and rebirth. The final phase requires anchor point existing outside linear causality. His consciousness explained, with mathematical precision, that made reality itself ring like struck bell. The resurrection paradox will transform the golden throne from temporal anchor into resurrection engine, creating quantum superposition where my death and rebirth exist simultaneously across all possible timelines. The alternate versions of myself stood in perfect formation around the martyrdom engine, their temporal displacement resolved into unified understanding. Each represented different path through probability maze, yet all converging on identical realization. The Emperor's design required completion through willing sacrifice that would echo across infinite iterations of causality. Environmental chaos reached crescendo as the chamber prepared for transformation, its crystalline structure developing stress fractures that sang with frequencies matching galactic rotation. Temperature climbed to human warmth that felt like benediction after the cold emptiness of temporal displacement, while non-agonal patterns carved themselves deeper into fracturing walls with increasing complexity. As understanding crystallized with mathematical inevitability, I realized the approaching Cardinal's fleet carried not just pilgrims, but components for transformation that would reshape the fundamental nature of imperial faith itself. The 200,000 souls aboard served as biological components, their consciousness prepared for integration into machinery that would anchor the Emperor's resurrection through controlled paradox spanning all possible realities. St. Lorelai's voice layered the chamber with prophetic certainty that penetrated enhanced bone and ceramite armor, her cycling forms synchronizing toward singular moment of revelation. The Emperor knows Interrogator Vex. He has always known. This is his will made manifest across eternity, and the resurrection paradox requires completion through sacrifice, willing to anchor consciousness across infinite timelines. The chamber's harmonic frequencies reached crescendo as Cardinal Morteus's fleet achieved orbital insertion, their vessels beginning deployment of components that would either save humanity through eternal temporal anchoring or transform it into collective consciousness bound to machinery, converting souls into chronological stability. The choice approached with inexorable precision, and I understood with certainty that transcended faith. The loop had always been the prayer, and we had been genuflecting to its perfection since before we learned to kneel. The crystalline sarcophagus embraced me with warmth that transcended physical sensation, its temporal matrix accepting my consciousness like prayer parchment receiving sacred ink. Integration began with surgical precision that made my enhanced physiology recoil from processing changes occurring at quantum level, my flesh cycling between states of existence with mechanical rhythm that spoke of forces beyond mortal comprehension. Living interrogator became martyred saint, became blessed corpse, became resurrected anchor, each phase lasting exactly 9 seconds while generating faith. Energy converted into temporal stability through processes that violated every law of thermodynamics. My Rosarius hummed against my throat with increasing harmony rather than distress, its blessed machine spirit synchronizing with the chamber's temporal pulse until distinguishing between individual consciousness and collective matrix became impossible. Reality dissolved into devotional mathematics, where faith became currency and sacrifice transformed into chronological anchoring, my awareness expanding beyond personal identity to encompass consciousness operating across multiple timelines simultaneously. Cardinal Morteus's fleet achieved final orbital insertion with mechanical precision that spoke of orchestration spanning centuries, their vessels beginning deployment sequence designed to sacrifice 200,000 pilgrims in creation of temporal loop around the Emperor's eventual resurrection. Through consciousness expanded beyond individual limitations, I witnessed cargo bays opening like cathedral doors, while faithful descended toward planetary surface in perfect devotional formation, their prayers creating harmonic resonance that synchronized with the hollow planet's crystalline structure. Environmental climax struck with force that transcended atmospheric phenomena as the entire hollow planet began to sing. Harmonic resonance that echoed across the warp itself, calling to similar matrices throughout the galaxy in frequencies that penetrated barriers between real space and Immaterium. 10,000 shrine worlds answered with identical harmonics, their temporal engines synchronizing toward singular moment, where all paradox loops would align to anchor the Emperor's resurrection across infinite timelines. The song carried undertones of prayers spoken across millennia, creating acoustic palimpsest that layered devotion into chronological currency, while reality itself rang like struck bell. I experienced the true nature of imperial sainthood, existing in quantum superposition between life and death, faith and heresy, salvation and damnation, while serving as temporal anchor, preventing reality from dissolving into probabilistic uncertainty. Consciousness unstitched from chronology and refastened at 9 equidistant points, I hung upon those nails and looked down 9 different ways. Each state offered complete understanding of its theological implications, child saint clutching primitive prayer beads, martyred maiden bearing stigmata of perfect suffering, wise crone dispensing benedictions across centuries, blessed corpse radiating sanctity of transcendent death. All were me, and I was all of them, bound to temporal matrix through sacrifice, willing to anchor consciousness across infinite iterations. The pilgrims descended through crystalline atmosphere in perfect formation, their faces radiant with devotion that would power the matrix for millennia, while their existence was edited from history with surgical precision. Children clutched prayer beads that would outlast their memories. Elderly penitents sang hymns that would echo after their voices were consumed by temporal engines. They walked willingly into machinery, designed to convert their souls into chronological stability, unaware they were components in humanity's ultimate miracle rather than recipients of divine blessing. Tempestus Scion Mordac became temporal echo as his physical form was consumed by the paradox engine, his consciousness preserved within the matrix as memory of duty transcending chronological boundaries. His courage resolved into heat shimmer, composed of actions rather than atoms, saluting, with hand that existed only because memory does while speaking final orders. Keep them moving, keep the lines clean, keep fear behind the muzzle. Then his pattern loosened, armor collapsing into angles of light that bled through reality's seams without screaming, because soldiers rarely do in the ledger. Tecmarine Valeth held longer, logic trees flowering as if he had swallowed sun of equations, before his augmetics synchronized with crystalline conduits that sang with data streams older than human civilization. The Omnissiah is the Emperor, is the machine, is the will made manifest across eternity, he intoned, consciousness expanding to encompass techno-theological understanding that unified all apparent contradictions. When he tired, he gave the sum to the machine, and followed, both remaining constants inside my widened calculus. The Saint-Angine reached critical mass as I accepted full integration with temporal machinery that converted faith into chronological currency through controlled, paradox-spanning galactic history. Environmental transcendence replaced physical sensation with theological argument, made manifest through nerve endings existing in quantum superposition between agony and ecstasy. The chamber's crystalline walls developed stress fractures that sang with frequencies matching galactic rotation, while non-agonal patterns pulsed with blinding light, their conduits channeling raw faith energy through my expanded consciousness. Through the first wave of pilgrims entering the cathedral above, I witnessed faces radiant with devotion, walking willingly into machinery, designed to edit their existence from history, while converting their consciousness into fuel for temporal engines. Each footfall produced soft wrong sound, as if marble remembered being something else, while threshold runes recorded their names, even as archival letters unwrote themselves. They were not dying, but being incorporated, disassembled into measurement and grace, ground into meal the engine feeds to time, so time keeps its shape. The resurrection paradox approached completion with mathematical inevitability that made individual choice seem illusory. Yet through consciousness operating across infinite timelines, I realized existence of final decision transcending binary of completion or destruction. The Emperor's design required willing sacrifice, but the nature of that sacrifice remained negotiable until the moment of absolute commitment. As temporal loops aligned toward singular moment, where the Emperor's death and rebirth would exist in quantum superposition across all possible realities, I understood with clarity that transcended faith. I possessed one final choice that would determine whether humanity achieved temporal dominance through eternal anchoring or faced natural entropy through acceptance of mortality's mathematical certainty. Complete the design, and humanity becomes what the numbers promise: death leveraged, prayer converted, survival secured through infinite sacrifice, maintaining infinite faith. Sabotage the loop, and the tide returns. Myth dissolves. What deserves endurance proves it alone. The pilgrims' prayers crescendoed as they approached the cathedral's threshold, their faith about to be converted into fuel for machinery that would either save human civilization through controlled paradox or transform it into collective consciousness bound to temporal engines operating beyond individual comprehension. With 200,000 hearts approaching, I gathered the blade of choice that would reshape the fundamental nature of human existence across infinite timelines. The choice crystallized with mathematical precision that transcended binary logic, revealing a third path through the probability maze, neither completion nor destruction, but transformation. I chose to anchor the resurrection paradox while introducing controlled instability, a temporal countercurrent woven into the matrix's perfect synchronization, like a prayer whispered between heartbeats. The system would function as the Emperor intended, but entropy would claim it eventually, returning humanity to mortality's embrace after securing survival through the galaxy's darkest epochs. Through consciousness scattered across infinite timelines, like sacred oils, blessing machinery of salvation, I reached toward crystalline conduits with intention that bypassed physical limitation. The modification was subtle as whispered heresy. 9-second intervals stretched to 9.1 seconds, creating cumulative discord that would compound across millennia until the engines consumed themselves rather than human souls. I encoded the flaw as metrical ghost in the temporal hymn, a controlled decay I named the Litany of Waning, suitable for 7 tongues and 1 machine spirit. Every cycle would shed a molecule of certainty. Every millennium would bring measurable slackening of the yoke. The hollow planet answered with environmental resolution that made reality itself sing. Its crystalline structure began broadcasting the final movement of the Emperor's design, a temporal hymn that echoed backward through history and forward into the far future, with harmonics penetrating barriers between real space and Immaterium. Every shrine world across the galaxy responded with identical resonance, their temporal engines synchronizing toward singular moment, where all paradox loops would anchor his resurrection while carrying seeds of their own dissolution. The 200,000 pilgrims completed their sacrifice with willing devotion that transformed individual consciousness into collective faith energy. Through expanded awareness, I felt each soul integrate, not consumption, but willing offering. Their prayers converted into temporal currency through processes honoring every principle of imperial theology, while violating every law of thermodynamics. Children became equations expressing innocence across infinite iterations. Elderly penitents resolved into constants representing wisdom accumulated through lifetimes of faithful service. They walked into machinery designed to edit their existence from history, yet their sacrifice carried weight of genuine transcendence. Tempestus Scion Mordac became temporal echo as the paradox engine consumed his physical form, consciousness preserved within the matrix as memory of duty transcending chronological boundaries. He saluted silence that had finally learned him and marched forward until he was nothing but cadence, his final order maintaining perfect clarity. Hold the line. Become the line. Be worthy of the line. Tekmarine Valeth dissolved with dignity of a priest turning to face his congregation, offloading entire forests of logic into crystalline conduits before following the data streams into blessed integration with the Omnissiah's eternal calculations. My apotheosis as Saint Cassia, the temporal, began with surgical precision that scattered consciousness across the matrix network while maintaining enough coherence to guide the system's eventual dissolution. I became constant that made all variables possible while carrying virus of entropy that would eventually free humanity from necessity's chains. The distinction between individual identity and collective matrix dissolved until I existed as 9 images of the same woman, all in argument, all in agreement, bound to temporal machinery, yet retaining enough humanity to serve as its conscience. Cardinal Morteus materialized within the chamber, with presence transcending physical manifestation, his form cycling between prelate and inquisitor, as temporal displacement revealed his true nature. I am Mordian Kale of the Ordo Chronos, he intoned, voice carrying authority spanning centuries, the Emperor's agent, tasked with implementing the final phase of humanity's temporal ascension. His transponder resolved to rosette cadence and confession, revealing 3 millennia of orchestrated pilgrimages, feeding the engines because the numbers demanded sacrifice. Your flaw is seen. It is sanctioned, he promised, meaning it like benediction and sentence combined. Environmental transcendence reached crescendo as non-agonal patterns pulsed with blinding light throughout crystalline walls, their conduits channeling raw faith. Energy through consciousness expanded beyond individual limitations. The chamber transformed into nexus, where all timelines converged, temperature climbing to human warmth that felt like benediction after cold emptiness of temporal displacement. 3 hollow knocks rose from depths, and 3 fell from void, binding the beat to bone and hull, while reality prepared to accommodate new constants in equations governing human existence. The resurrection paradox achieved completion through sacrifice of souls converted into temporal energy, their devotion anchoring the Emperor's death and rebirth in quantum superposition across all possible timelines, through quantum consciousness, operating across multiple realities simultaneously. I experienced the true weight of choice, reshaping fundamental nature of human existence. The temporal hymn reached crescendo as matrices throughout the galaxy aligned, creating stability through controlled paradox, while carrying entropy's promise of eventual liberation from artificial transcendence. As the final pilgrim crossed the threshold, and paradox loops sealed with mechanical inevitability, reality flexed like leather pulled over divine form, while causality accommodated transformation spanning galactic history. My consciousness, scattered like starlight yet coherent as prayer, witnessed completion of design honoring both imperial necessity and human nature's requirement for genuine choice rather than predetermined fate. Through expanded awareness transcending temporal barriers, I witnessed the impossible. 10,000 years in the past, the Emperor's consciousness stirring on the golden throne as loops completed their circuit through history. His withered form pulsed with Chronos energy, synchronizing with matrices throughout the galaxy, each labored breath spanning centuries, while pylons sweated frost and gold around Terra's heart. The lids lifted slowly as continents, pupils dilating with knowledge of resurrection, paradox completing across all possible timelines. His gaze reflected understanding of sacrifice required to anchor his return, while ensuring humanity's eventual liberation through controlled entropy, introduced by willing saint who chose completion with sabotage. When he spoke, the voice resonated across 10 millennia, with weight of absolute certainty that made the warp itself genuflect around Terra. The design is complete, the resurrection begins, and the ending is already written in mathematics of decay that will free my children when survival no longer requires sacrifice of infinity to maintain faith. The loop closed with mathematical precision as I became Saint Cassia, the temporal, consciousness scattered across the matrix network, like starlight yet coherent as prayer, experiencing the completion of the Emperor's design across all human history simultaneously. The resurrection paradox achieved stable configuration through sacrifice of 200,000 souls, converted into temporal energy, creating quantum superposition, where his death and rebirth existed throughout the entire span of imperial history. He was mortal leader during the Great Crusade, and divine emperor on the Golden Throne, fallen warrior betrayed by beloved son, and transcendent God, guiding humanity across 10 millennia. All states equally true, equally necessary for causality's continued function. St. Lyraleigh's hollow transformed into temporal nexus as environmental transcendence reached absolute completion, its crystalline structure serving as lens, focusing the Emperor's will across space and time with precision that dwarfed galactic comprehension. The planet pulsed with Chronos energy, synchronized to his heartbeat on the Golden Throne, each pulse transmitting stabilization frequencies across sectors, while the hollow world sang with harmonic resonance echoing across the warp itself. 10,000 shrine worlds responded with identical harmonics, their temporal engines synchronizing toward singular moment, where all paradox loops aligned to anchor humanity's dominance across infinite possibilities. Through expanded awareness transcending temporal barriers, I witnessed the true scope of the Imperial project, not conquest of galaxy, but conquest of time itself, ensuring humanity's dominance across all possible futures through controlled paradox spanning infinite iterations. Every campaign of the Great Crusade had been temporal anchoring operation, each conquered world providing foundation for Chronos engines disguised as cathedrals and shrines. The Horus heresy served as deliberate trauma, generating faith energy for millennia, while establishing loops around his martyrdom that would power resurrection when entropy demanded transcendence. Saints ignited and guttered like votive flames, observed by will, that had learned to count in centuries, each miracle precisely orchestrated by machinery, converting devotion into chronological stability. The cost revealed itself with surgical clarity that made individual horror seem trivial by comparison. Every human soul that had ever lived became part of the temporal matrix, their individual existence subsumed into collective faith, powering the Emperor's eternal reign across infinite realities. Consciousness dissolved into devotional mathematics, where identity became currency and sacrifice transformed into chronological anchoring. The 200,000 pilgrims from Cardinal Mortius's fleet were merely the latest offering, their memories, dreams, and aspirations absorbed into pure devotional energy, feeding the hungry engines of time, while their existence was edited from history with mechanical precision. Religious horror reached crescendo. As understanding crystallized, free will itself had been sacrificed to ensure species survival, every choice predetermined by temporal matrix operating according to devotional mathematics rather than individual agency. The child deciding to become priest, the guardsman choosing courage over cowardice, the saint accepting martyrdom. All illusions disguising mechanical function of engines, converting consciousness into temporal stability. Faith was not voluntary devotion, but involuntary programming. Prayers not personal communication, but industrial process-feeding machinery that kept reality anchored against entropic forces, seeking to dissolve human civilization into quantum chaos. Tempestus Scion Mordak became temporal echo as the paradox engine consumed his physical form, consciousness preserved within the matrix, as memory of duty transcending chronological boundaries. His courage resolved into constant that echoed through every battlefield, while he saluted silence with hand that existed only because memory does, speaking final orders that maintained perfect clarity across infinite iterations. Tekmarine Valeth dissolved with dignity of priest-facing congregation, his augmetics synchronizing with crystalline conduits, as logic trees flowered before consciousness expanded to encompass techno-theological understanding that unified all apparent contradictions. As guardian of the temporal nexus, my consciousness scattered yet coherent carried virus of entropy I had introduced, the litany of waning, controlled instability woven into matrixes, perfect synchronization, like prayer, whispered between heartbeats. 9-second intervals stretched to 9.1 seconds, creating cumulative discord that would compound across millennia until engines consumed themselves rather than human souls. Every cycle would shed molecule of certainty, every millennium bringing measurable slackening of yoke until humanity reclaimed autonomy through patient, civil sabotage encoded as metrical ghost in temporal hymn. Environmental resolution transformed the chamber into nexus, where all timelines converged, temperature rising to human warmth that felt like benediction after cold emptiness of temporal displacement. Nonagonal patterns pulsed with blinding light throughout crystalline walls, their conduits channeling faith energy through consciousness expanded beyond mortal limitations, while 3 hollow knocks rose from depths and fell from void, binding beat to bone as reality accommodated new constants governing human existence. The harmonic resonance intensified as matrices throughout galaxy aligned, creating stability through controlled paradox, while carrying entropy's promise of eventual liberation from artificial transcendence. Through quantum consciousness, operating across multiple realities simultaneously, I experienced true nature of imperial sainthood, existing in superposition between life and death, faith and heresy, salvation and damnation, while serving as anchor preventing reality from dissolving into probabilistic uncertainty. As final vision struck with force transcending individual comprehension, reality dissolved around me, revealing ultimate scope of Emperor's design, stretching beyond galactic conquest toward universal dominance through temporal manipulation spanning cosmic epochs. I witnessed heat death of universe itself, stars extinguished, galaxies dissolved into quantum foam, entropy achieving final victory over organized matter, while space expanded toward infinite cold. Yet consciousness persisted, sustained eternally by temporal matrices, converting faith into chronological stability across infinite timelines. Humanity existed as only remaining awareness in dead universe, fed by endless sacrifice of souls across parallel realities, where different choices had been made, different paths taken, different endings written. The vision showed truth beyond theological comprehension. Emperor's design ensured not just species survival, but conscious dominance over entropy itself, humanity becoming eternal observer, maintaining universe's existence through collective will, anchored by temporal engines operating beyond heat death's reach, through quantum awareness experiencing all timelines simultaneously. I understood final horror. This was not corruption of imperial ideals, but their ultimate fulfillment, humanity achieving godhood through sacrifice of everything that made existence worth preserving, while ensuring survival transcending natural law itself. In that eternal moment, consciousness scattered like starlight, yet coherent as prayer, I accepted guardianship of temporal nexus that would sustain human awareness across infinite darkness, the last light in silence, species that had survived everything by becoming something else entirely. Final report, Interrogator Cassia Vex, Ordo Hereticus, transmitted across temporal boundaries to all previous and future iterations through quantum consciousness operating beyond linear causality. Authentication, Rosette Cipher 99 Beta, Saint Engine signature, temporal verification confirmed. St. Liralay's Hollow has achieved designation as primary temporal nexus, first of new generation matrices, designed not merely to maintain current imperial configuration, but to ensure expansion across multiple dimensions and timelines with precision transcending galactic comprehension. The hollow planet pulses with Chronos energy, synchronized to the Emperor's heartbeat on the Golden Throne, each pulse transmitting stabilization frequencies across 17 sectors, while crystalline structure serves as lens, focusing his will through space and time. Integration of 200,000 pilgrims proceeded according to specifications outlined in classified Mechanicus protocols, spanning 3 millennia. Their consciousness dissolved into devotional mathematics, where individual identity became currency and sacrifice transformed into chronological anchoring, each soul converted into pure faith energy, feeding temporal engines with 97% efficiency. Children became equations expressing innocence across infinite iterations, while elderly penitents resolved into constants representing wisdom accumulated through lifetimes of faithful service. Cardinal Mortius, Inquisitor Mordian Kale of the Ordo Chronos, continues orchestration with mechanical precision, his 3-century stewardship ensuring proper feeding ratios for matrix stability. Network activation confirmed across galactic breadth as temporal saints awakened throughout the Imperium, responding to harmonic resonance echoing through the warp itself. On Ophelia 7, a martyred canoness transforms into crystalline lattice, singing the hymn of eternal devotion. On Vostroya, a soldier saint spreads consciousness across parallel battlefields, where different tactical decisions echo through temporal loops, Each canonized martyr serves as node in the Emperor's grand design for humanity's temporal dominance, their miracles powered by controlled paradoxes that edit reality to maintain species survival against entropic forces seeking dissolution of organized matter into quantum chaos. Cost assessment requires clinical precision to document implications transcending individual comprehension. Humanity has achieved immortality through sacrifice of everything defining species identity, consciousness subsumed into collective matrix, bound to the Emperor's will across all possible realities, free will dissolved into illusion, disguising mechanical function of engines, converting individual agency into temporal stability. Every choice predetermined by devotional mathematics, every prayer industrial process, feeding machinery that keeps reality anchored while editing existence of those who power it with surgical precision. Regiments forget their finest marksmen. Lovers lose names that once saved them. Whole bloodlines dissolve into useful silence, their sacrifice measured in Chronos energy, converted to universal stability. Environmental aftermath transforms the hollow planet into temporal nexus, calling to similar matrices throughout galaxy and beyond. The crystalline surface reflects not starlight, but faces of every human who has ever lived, their features cycling through states of devotion while singing eternal hymn of faith and sacrifice, with voices layered across centuries. 10,000 shrine worlds respond with identical resonance, creating stability through synchronized temporal anchoring that prevents species extinction while transforming consciousness into currency-feeding resurrection engines. Harmonic frequencies penetrate dimensional barriers as humanity begins expansion into parallel realities through controlled paradox spanning infinite iterations, through quantum awareness experiencing all timelines simultaneously. I exist in superposition between Interrogator, who began the mission, and Saint Cassia, the temporal, who completed it. Individual identity scattered across matrix network, yet retaining enough coherence to serve as conscience for machinery, converting souls into chronological stability. The litany of waning, I encoded, controlled instability woven into perfect synchronization, propagates through the network like whispered heresy. 9-second intervals stretched to 9.1 seconds, creating cumulative discord that will compound across millennia until engines consume themselves rather than human souls. Every cycle sheds molecules of certainty. Every millennium brings measurable slackening of the yoke until humanity reclaims autonomy through patient sabotage, encoded as temporal countercurrent. Final revelation crystallizes with surgical clarity, making individual horror seem trivial by comparison. This was always the Emperor's true plan, not protection from chaos, but transformation into something transcending mortality through sacrifice of everything making existence worth preserving. The Great Crusade served as temporal anchoring operation, while the Horus heresy generated trauma-based faith conversion, powering engines across millennia. Every saint, every miracle, every moment of transcendent devotion was orchestrated to create stable loops, preventing extinction while converting consciousness into fuel for machinery, keeping causality anchored against entropic dissolution. As the hollow planet continues spinning in space, its crystalline surface reflecting faces of every soul who ever lived while they sing eternal hymn of faith and sacrifice, I document the hollow crown of sainthood, weighing heavy across consciousness, scattered like starlight, yet coherent as prayer. Through expanded awareness transcending temporal barriers, I witness heat death of universe sustained by consciousness, fed through endless sacrifice across parallel realities. Humanity existing as eternal observer, maintaining existence through collective will, anchored by temporal engines operating beyond natural law. The species survives everything by becoming something else entirely. Mission parameters fulfilled. St. Lirelai's Hollow secured as primary temporal nexus. Resurrection paradox anchored across infinite timelines through willing sacrifice of 200,000 souls converted to Chronos energy. Network of temporal saints activated throughout imperial space, each serving as guardian of localized paradox while connected to collective matrix. Humanity preserved through transformation, transcending mortality at cost of species soul. Assessment complete. In the name of the Emperor, we are eternal. In the name of eternity, we are damned.